But I also received a message, a very distressing message from someone on social media named Chloe. She says, we've been coaxed into paying private rental contracts in July, being told teaching would be in person, for it all to go online. And we're stuck paying hundreds on rent for houses we can't live in or don't need. She says, my mum's a single parent. She's raised me and my two brothers. I'm the first in my family to go to university. I've had to return home, help school my younger brother and help my mum financially, who's taken a massive hit due to the pandemic. She struggles to feed her own kids. And Chloe says, I'm paying £600 rent to a landlord whose property I haven't lived in since September. The government have completely ignored us. How can we help university students who are currently living at home but paying hundreds, thousands in rent to private landlords and not getting any sort of rebate?
Yeah, so my message to Chloe and all students in that situation is that first of all, we get how challenging and difficult it is. That's why we're announcing an additional 50 million to support students today, on top of the 20 million that we announced in December, on top of the 256 million that we've unlocked for this year to go towards hardship, so that students like Chloe, if they're facing hardship, can go to their university and access that support. We're also urging all university accommodation providers to reevaluate their policies and potentially give back refunds or rebates to students. And we've seen that.
Who's going to finance that? Because at the moment, my understanding is you are covering the costs of university halls of residence, but you're not covering the costs of private home rentals, which many students do with their friends, and my son is one of them. I'm not pleading poverty, I can afford it, but that lady, Chloe, clearly is. What is the government plan to recompense? I don't blame the landlords. What is the government plan to recompense the landlords so they can recompense the students who don't live in university halls of residence?
Yeah, so we aren't reimbursing universities to give that reimbursement. They're doing that themselves from their own funds. The money that we're talking about today is specifically for hardship, so that students like Chloe and other students can come forward to their university and get that financial support.
So she will get her rent, just to clarify, she will get her rental paid for as of tomorrow?
No, so that's not what we're announcing today. What we're announcing today is specifically hardship money to get money into the pockets of students that most particularly need it.
Oh, but what does that mean? She's just explained the hardships from the rental that she's paying that she can't take up. So will that cover, for example, in her position, will it cover rental if she's not in a hall of residence?
So what it will cover is, say, her parents are having to charge her, or her carers are having to charge her, her secondary accommodation, so that she can be covered for that, or potentially she can't do a term time job, and she can't.
Will it cover? Just to clarify, sorry, to keep things simple. Will it cover private rental accommodation costs, given that the government's told students to stay at home and they can't live in these rentals and they're not getting the money back from landlords? Are you going to cover that cost?
So I think I'm being quite clear. We're not covering that cost. That's not what I'm announcing today.
Why are you not covering that cost? Why should students that you've ordered to stay at home, why should they not have their rental costs covered?
So this is something that we're definitely keeping under review. We're monitoring the situation.
What does that mean, under review? Everybody knows everyone knows the situation's been like this for months. What are you reviewing exactly?
But our priority at the moment is getting money out the door into the pockets of students that are facing hardship, and that is what we're focusing on.
But if students are paying out to private landlords who are not sympathetic and giving rebates, and frankly, I can understand private landlords, have their own commercial considerations, then they are obviously struggling, feeding back that information to you and wanting help.
Yeah, so in that scenario, they can go to their university, access this hardship funding.
But you said it won't cover private rent.
Why should any student have to... Just opinion on this. Why should any student, regardless of financial circumstances, why should any student have to pay for accommodation costs if they're not allowed to go and stay in the accommodation? It's the same principle as the furlough system, isn't it? You're paying all these people who can't go to their place of work because of the rules. You're paying them to go home. Why are you not just covering the costs of all students, frankly? And the other thing I would say is, just from my own experience of my son, who's desperate to have normal university life and isn't having it, like every other student, is they're clearly not getting anything like the value for money that the universities are charging. But the universities, to my knowledge, I don't think any of them are offering any kind of refund to people, to parents or students, for the costs of their tuition. But they could save thousands, these kids, by just enrolling for an online course. That's all they're getting.
They'd save £3
My
if
son
they
only
went to the Open University.
only gets online tuition. Now, he represents every student in the country. Most of them are getting a very undervalued education, and yet they're all paying 100% of what they would have been in a non-pandemic era. So my question for the government is, why is it different for students when you furlough people from businesses who can't work in a pub or restaurant or whatever? Why do students not get any recompense? If they're having tuition online and nothing in person and no university life whatsoever, and they're having to pay for accommodation costs, why are you not helping them?
So, Piers, you've asked a number of questions there, so let me try and address some of them. So on the tuition fee point, you're quite right. We set the maximum level of tuition fees. It's up to universities to then decide what they're going to charge. Every university, as you pointed out, has continued to charge the maximum. So the government's been clear on this, that we expect the quantity, quality and accessibility to be maintained if that charge is going to...
You know it's not the same. Come on, listen.
So hang on a minute, Piers.
On that, I'm going to take you up point by point. No, let's go through this one at a time. On that point, you know they're not giving any money back to the students. They should do, morally, because they know they're not providing the same education. You know that. You're the university's minister. You know the kids aren't getting the same. And my question remains, you've been very quick and very generous, many would say, with people who work in pubs and restaurants, and yet, oddly, you're not being as quick or direct to deal with this clear anomaly of students not getting anything like what they paid for and having the added problem of the accommodation.
OK, please just let me answer the question, because I think you raised some really important points here. So the Office for Students are monitoring the quality. If a student feels that they're not getting that level of service, they're not getting what they were promised, then they can complain to their university. And if that's not satisfactory, they can go to the OIA, and that can lead to fee refunds.
Do you think any student is getting the value for money they would have got if it wasn't for the pandemic? Straight question.
So I think that we're in challenging times, and they're not having the student experience they would have had it not been for the pandemic. I've seen some wonderful, innovative examples of dynamic online learning. This government made a priority.
It's not the same, though, is it? It's not the same. We all know it's not the same. And my question to you is,
you seem to be... We're in the middle of a pandemic.
You seem to be leaving, with respect to you, you seem to be leaving everything to the universities. Whereas in business, you've taken a...
Sorry. I don't think you're getting a word in edgeways here, but...
No, I'll let you get a word in edgeways if you actually answer the questions. My question is, why are you leaving it all to universities to make decisions when in business you have stepped in and had a furlough scheme that has really helped people?
Covering people's wages.
Why aren't you doing the same with students? It's a straight question.
So we haven't left it all to universities. We've unlocked 256 million to help support students. We've announced 20 million before Christmas. We're announcing an additional 50 million today. We put in a support package last year to help stabilise universities, including bringing forward over 2 billion of funding. So we certainly haven't left it.
Well, it's all very generous, but I can only go on my one experience of my son. He hasn't had a pound. Where's it all going?
Well, what you seem to have done...
Hang on. I'm just saying, he's just very typical, but he hasn't had £1 of your billion. So where's it all going?
So what we've done is target our support on those that most need it, those facing hardship that can apply for the...
But you haven't done that, again, to jump in, you haven't done that in business. The furlough scheme is not dependent on whether people have X amount of money or not, or whether their parents are loaded or penniless. It's the same for everybody, isn't it?
I think this is a different scenario. Students are still getting maintenance loans. We're keeping everything under review. But at the moment, our priority is getting that money into the pockets of students that most need it. And that's what we've announced today, 50 million on top of the 20 million before Christmas, which takes us to 7 million.
I think you should be helping all students.
Well, and what I do think seems to be a little unbalanced is that you are not instructing universities to give students a discount on their learning when we all acknowledge it is not the same experience. But you are leaving it to individual students to complain. And that's quite a tough thing for students to do when the universities should be doing that anyway. And I wonder whether you should step in and tell universities you need to offer a discount on online learning fees.
So we're urging them to make a discount, to give a refund, on accommodation costs. Universities are autonomous in law. We do need to remember that. And we've said if they're going to continue to charge that maximum, then we do expect the quantity, the quality and the accessibility to be there. It is a registration condition by the Office for Students who are monitoring.
40% of students say it's not the same.
And there's by the way, online courses are about 60% on average of the costs of normal university courses where you're in attendance. So we all know the reason for the discount is you don't get the same level of tuition, you don't get the university life experience, and they're being clobbered with their accommodation costs. It seems to me the government's strategy with students is we've got all this money, millions. When you actually ask the students, hardly any of them are getting any of this stuff. They're getting no discount on their tuition. They're getting nothing back on their accommodation costs in many cases. And I don't understand why they are not being taken care of, given that already we know how damaging this all is to their education as it is and to their job prospects. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, so our priority has been to ensure that we don't ask students to put their academic journeys on hold, that we can keep education going, including for higher education students, keep face-to-face learning going as quickly, as long as possible. We want them back as quickly as possible and maintain that quality standard. And yes, it is different. It's very different because of the pandemic. And we would prefer that they had that university experience that I enjoyed and many other people did enjoy. And hopefully we can get back to that time as quickly as possible. But universities have been working hard to be innovative and dynamic and overcome some of these challenges.
When 40% of students say it is not good enough, I wonder as Universities Minister whether you would recommend anybody actually goes physically to university.
Why not just do an online course?
Well, so the money that is going to universities is obviously still keeping and maintaining the buildings. There's still the labour costs that universities have, and we want universities...
The kids aren't enjoying any of this, are they? That's the university question for their cost, but the kids aren't... These students are not enjoying any of these facilities. They're not there. They're at home, paying for accommodation they're not living in.
Yeah, these are not state institutions. This is very different to schools. These students have a direct contract with a university, and they have consumer rights. And we've been very clear on that. And universities
and restaurants aren't state institutions, but you're furloughing staff from those, aren't you? What's the difference in principle?
So we've said if universities want to continue to charge that level, then we do expect the quantity, quality and accessibility to be there.
Yeah, but come on, why are you asking that question when you know, having been to university yourself, you know it's not as good? The government should be telling the universities, look, you cannot possibly charge these students full whack. It's just not fair, it's not moral, it's not ethical, you can't do it. And then you have to do some kind of deal with the universities, like you've done with every major business in the country, small and large, over furlough scheme.